I'll introduce our first speaker here. We're going to do kind of a first speaker and then straight into a panel. And I'm very excited to introduce Justine Cornelsen. I'm sure many of you are familiar with her. But she is the Agronomic and Regulatory Services Manager with Brett Young Seeds. She's going to be talking about the Stripe Alert, Unmasking Verticillium in Canola Fields. She carries over 10 years of agricultural and environmental experience from previous positions such as with the Canola Council, AAFC, Parks Canada. She graduated 2014 from Brandon University with her bachelor's in science, and 2021 completed her MSc here at the U of M. And this is my favorite part of the intro. She is a plant disease enthusiast, so she'll be talking all about verticillium stripe. And when she's not out scouting fields, you can likely find her back on the farm with all her horses, cows, and ducks. I didn't know, ducks too. So welcome, Justine. Let's give her a round of applause. And here we go.
Awesome. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much, Mac and Sonia, for the invitation to be here. When I was putting this presentation on my memory stick to insert, I found my one from 2022, and oddly enough, the last time I was here at Mac was also speaking around verticillium stripe, so it's not going anywhere for some weird reason. So I've got 30 minutes to kind of give you the highlights of what we roughly or vaguely might know about this new disease, and then I'm going to pose all of these questions that you guys have to a group of real experts on a verticillium panel discussion afterwards. So I am just kind of scraping the surface right now with what we know. Very basic, because I've done enough plant science courses here at the University of Manitoba. We got to always break everything down, and we deal with a few different names and terminology. So verticillium longisporum is the actual plant pathogen that we are dealing with. It is a soil-borne fungi, so when we're thinking about different diseases, is this living in the soil, very similar to that of clubroot, which we're very familiar with. It is a xylem invading, so what that means is it's coming up through the roots and moving and translocating through the xylem up into the stem. It is specific or targets brassicas, or the brassica family, so predominantly we're worried about canola here. However, there's murmurs and some literature showing it might be uptaken into other different species as well. We haven't really seen those effects here yet. The lineage stuff doesn't really mean a whole lot to me. The main kind of takeaway of this on verticillium longisporum is it's not diverse or really complicated species. We are typically dealing with two different lines, the A1D1 and the A1D3. So that is the actual plant pathogen, the species. What it causes in canola is verticillium stripe. So this is a monocyclic disease, so it only has one life cycle a season, and it seems to really thrive in hot, dry conditions as we progress throughout the growing season. And what it causes in canola plants, or the damage that we do see, is stem senescence, very fragile plant stems. They'll shred in your hand. This eventually leads to plant lodging and really complicates or makes harvest quite challenging. So just a really brief timeline and why there's maybe been an increased focus on it. This is a new disease to Canada. So this was first found just outside of Winnipeg here on a research farm in 2014. That was the first identification of verticillium longisporum. So of that species here in Canada, it has been found in other canola producing regions around the globe. So very predominant over in Europe. So from that point, because it's new, CFIA got involved. They checked to look to see if we could find this in other provinces. It was found all across Canada, so in 6 of the provinces and all across the prairie provinces. It's here. There was a lot of murmurs and changes around the actual name it causes or disease it would cause in plants. Here in Canada, we don't typically see a lot of wilt, or the wilting symptoms that we do see over in Europe. We see more of a stem senescence or stem stripe. So that's the name change. So I always cringe when I hear verticillium wilt. It's actually verticillium stripe in canola. So anyways, that's my being nitpicky. Really up until about 2018, not that no one took it seriously, but there wasn't this excitement or interest around it. There wasn't research projects on it. People weren't really concerned. Yeah, it's here, but whatever. And it was after that point we started to kind of get into that drier cycle and symptoms became more noticeable. I know that's where I started seeing different field cases of it outside of the Red River Valley, so north of Riding Mountain National Park. I had pulled a few different fields there. So we were starting to see more of it, and the symptoms have started to become very obvious. As we move forward, the last 5 years, it has been terrible here in Manitoba. We've seen it move across into Saskatchewan and now cases in Alberta as well. So it is widespread. This is a kind of a combination of we now know what we're looking for, being a really key piece there. Disease cycle. So we know we're starting to figure out what to identify. We're trying to now figure out how this disease works. With my time at Canola Council, we did design this verticillium stripe disease cycle or disease life cycle. So pulled a lot from the literature that we were getting out of Europe on that to really understand this disease and how it works. I won't go through it. It is a great resource. You can find it online. And understanding then what this pathogen really needs for it to thrive and cause the disease. So a lot of the conditions or the environmental conditions for this disease to do well in, this literature is pulled from Europe. We don't have a lot of great work here yet in Canada to really validate the conditions of what we're seeing this in. So literature temperatures, soil temperature above 15 degrees, that's a pretty standard spring, June temperature for us here in Manitoba. We're getting some hotter springs, so a few years back we were really warm. Record May, record June temperatures. Over 23 is pretty easy to achieve. And then as we progress, the heat and drought. So those really dry conditions, and especially once we get into August, those are the conditions that make this disease pop and make it visible in our fields. There's been some new work out of the University of Alberta showing a little bit of a relationship to pH, so higher pH soils seem to exaggerate the symptoms. I think there's another project that's just coming back that's showing the reverse of that. So it's up there, but take that with a grain of salt. I know I've quizzed a few of you agronomists on that and looking at relationships that we've seen in Manitoba. Hasn't been an easy one to tease out. So, okay, we're starting to understand what we're looking for or what we're working with. And that's really what the last 10 years have been about, is trying to spot this and identify this. Because as of 10 years ago, we didn't have a hot clue what we were looking for. So, and I know it sounds basic, and if you've seen me talk before on this topic, you're gonna see these slides and these images before, but this was really key in understanding and trying to quantify what we've been seeing and dealing with. So this is a field I was really frustrated with, taking samples, trying to do my master's degree in blackleg, and I was getting that starburst pattern. Going in, 60% seed color change, seeing not that standard, and I'm gonna have to use, got a mouse lockup. You want to help with the pointer? Not seeing that standard blackening, or black tissue that we know very well with the cross root section of blackleg. The starburst pattern that had come afterwards, I was seeing it on so many plants, but not really seeing the above. So that starburst, there we go. That starbursting pattern, that was really all I was seeing. No above symptoms, plants above that looked just fine. And I'm like, well, what is this? This is obviously something new and different. It's not my typical blackleg symptoms. What the heck? So this has been key in understanding and early diagnosis. I'm just going to whip through a few images here, looking at symptoms and comparing them to other diseases. I think for the longest time, verticillium's probably been here much longer than prior to 2014, but we were misdiagnosing it. You guys can play your own little game here, but can you figure out which one's verticillium here, top or bottom? Bottom, yeah, really easy. So 5 years ago, this was a really combination between sclerotinia and verticillium, that stem shredding, the really fragile plants. Not something that we really knew and would see early with verticillium, but over time, that's what you get. Here's another trick one, top or bottom? Bottom. So we've got gray stem on top. So these are samples pulled post-harvest. Actually, the best time to look for verticillium is post-harvest. That's when the symptoms are really, really obvious. Those stems have really broke down. They've really degraded and shredded. If you're comparing that to gray stem, those stems are gray all over, but they're really firm, and they don't typically break or shred in your hand. This is a new trick one for any of you that have seen me talk. It's actually the bottom, and if you look really, really close, this is our new disease, or not just new disease, but another disease we're dealing with is the sooty mold. So that leaves a black powdery residue on the outside of the stem. Verticillium, you need to still pull back that outer stem wall to then see, or that outer stem epidermis, to then reveal the mycosclerotia, which is the key, which we'll move to the next slide, which is the key diagnostic feature. So that is the sign that we are looking for when dealing with verticillium. So I've got the comparison here of, we've got the mycosclerotia on the stem, underneath the stem wall. If you look at my base of my thumb there, there's a sclerotia body, which is showing that there's sclerotinia. And we move over and we've got a plant that on the outside is showing pycnidia for blackleg. Once you pull that back underneath there, you're seeing verticillium and the mycosclerotia showing through. So once we finally start to know what we're looking for, then you get a combination of them. And this is something we see quite consistently in fields. Typically in our surveys, we see a lot of blackleg and verticillium together. So it really complicates trying to rate one or the other disease. So we know what we're looking for. Now, how bad is it? And so Manitoba Agriculture and Ag Canada do a really fabulous canola disease survey. This is something that has been going for 20 plus years. I've only pulled the last, I don't even know if 8, 9 years worth of numbers. And I wanted to just show the differences between diseases. The first one being sclerotinia. You can see the variability. This is the percent of prevalence. So what this means is that when we go and survey the number of fields that are actually showing the disease, it could be one plant in that field, but that are still showing the disease would be marked as that it's there and prevalent. So a sclerotinia year this past year, we were down around 40% prevalence. You can see it's very variable and weather dependent. As we move over to blackleg, it's high. Every year, we're typically in that 70 to 80% prevalence, so 80% of our fields in Manitoba have blackleg. I do want to draw attention to the last 3 years. We've seen a really slight decline. Now, do I think blackleg in Manitoba has reduced? No. I think verticillium has really complicated and made it difficult to properly diagnose verticillium in those fields. As we move to verticillium, you can see here it's been a really steep incline the last few years. And now, not that our numbers have changed drastically, but we now know what we're looking for. Back in 2017, we didn't know what we're looking for, so it was only in 2-3% of the fields. It was likely there in many more. Just also looking at surveyors, there's one year here, 2023. A group of the surveyors didn't actually diagnose verticillium, so I think that number should have been much higher. So you've got a whole group of surveyors that just didn't know what they were looking for. So none of their reports actually showed verticillium. So surveyor consistency and training is super valuable, right? We're still all learning this together of what to look for. So there's a lot of things that go into this, but the really alarming part is, so we've got verticillium up over 70% of our fields. I would suspect that's even higher based on when you're in that field and actually surveying. If we're going in post-harvest, I imagine that number is actually even higher. Disease incidence. So disease incidence is the number of plants in the field that are infected. So typically these surveys are done on 100 plants. You can see sclerotinia, 8%, okay, blackleg 6. That's the typical number for blackleg, it's low. We're usually under 10% of the plants actually showing symptoms for the disease. It's the verticillium number that's very alarming, 30%. So 30% of those plants in the field are showing symptoms. And I wanted to just pull that out even further. So this is a graphic that Sonia Wilson had pulled together this year, summarizing the 2025 data. You've got the prevalence number, so that's the line, just showing that increase, showing it up over 70%. And then you've got the incidence of all crops surveyed. So that would be all the canola fields, ones with and without verticillium, and what that level of incidence is, and then just those that are infected for verticillium. So you can see that increase. So when we start to look at the incidence for infested crops, it's up over 40%. So that's a significant amount of plants in a field that are showing this disease. The one other key part when we're looking at surveying and trying to quantify damage is looking at disease severity. So this has been a bit of a wild card. As of right now, none of the provincial provincial surveys look at severity. It's been a long discussed issue and how we want to actually try to quantify this. In June of this year, Canola Council released a disease severity scale. This was a graphic that we had worked on within the steering group, Verticillium steering group. It's something that it helps to roughly capture what we're seeing, but it is not necessarily a user-friendly scale. And of the agronomists here today, did any of you use this scale in the field? Got a few. Harold. Okay, right, the few. So, and really, I just will take my experience with it. It is a very tough thing to, in the field, determine the difference of 50, 55, 75% infection of Mycosclerotia on a stem. Very, very challenging. And typically, if you're in at your normal surveying time when you're looking for other diseases, you fall within that 2 to 3 range. There's a lot of plants. This year was not as severe in my mind early on. So there was a lot of maybe 2s and 3s, but very tough to identify on a plant-by-plant basis. So I know a lot of people struggled with adopting this. There was a lot of modified versions. I don't know how many different unique scales I actually received from agronomists, quantifying it in their own ways, which I think is great because we need that information and we need it to be generated. But we still don't have a really solid standard to compare across organizations, companies, and we're going to hear about this more within the panel discussion as well. But just the issue. So we struggle with when to get in there and actually rate these plants. The recommendation is late. And I know my experience is you're in there one week, come back the next week, and it's a completely different looking field with this disease, especially in the fall. Plant maturity comes into effect. It's really tough to quantify Mycosclerotia. And then there is no relationship over to yield loss. So yes, we're getting an average severity rating of 4, but what does that relate to in regards to yield? Which is our next question, and it will remain a big question still. 2025 yield in Manitoba, what was it for canola? Anyone seen the latest stats can? Getting closer, we're getting warmer. It was much higher than last year. So last year in 2024, we were, it was a really bad year. 36 for the average across Manitoba, or across the prairies. The average across Western Canada this year was 44.7. That's an early estimate. It might round up a few more as well. I think Manitoba was 44.8, or it might have been the average. So a more consistent year. This is another record break, or would be considered a record-breaking year for yield. So that's positive. We'll take that. How many of you dealt with verticillium in your fields this year in Manitoba? But I don't see everyone's hands up on this. Come on. You saw it. You saw it. Yeah, okay. That's just looks. That's fair. So the literature is even messier on this when we start looking at it. A lot of this work has been based in Europe, so that is on oilseed rape. We're dealing with winter varieties, so they're in the ground much longer. But it's chaotic. But you can see one of the predominant research groups on this calls it the invincible threat. And then this is the literature. We've got wild ranges, 30 to 50% loss, 10 to 50, 20 to 80, depending on inoculation methods. Yield losses are inconsistent or insignificant. The one project that we do have here in at the University of Alberta was looking at inoculation techniques and methods. It was upwards of 63 to 80%. So some really high ranges. And one of the things that we are seeing is this disease is very, not that it's difficult to work with, but we see very different symptoms when we move from a lab greenhouse setting into the field. So that lab work isn't really translocating to what we're seeing at the field level. So now I'll move to the farmer anecdotes. I get all sorts of comments, and I'm sure you guys all receive very different ranges when it comes to yield loss. One of my previous bosses here that lived in the Red River Valley said it's the largest single yield robber here. And really, it's what is keeping us from not getting over 60 bushels an acre. It's keeping us flat there. A grower here in Manitoba last year said for 2024, it was so challenging for them to grow canola in that portage area that they're really going to struggle moving forward on growing the crop. Others, it's a 10 to 15% loss, like, whatever, no big deal. Symptoms were there, but I had 55 bushels an acre. Who cares? It's way above the average. And then looking at some small plot, working with the researchers saying 5 to 9 bushels an acre. So those kind of numbers start to draw some alarm, and I'm like, ooh, okay. So we really struggle with quantifying this because we don't have a standard disease severity scale that actually translates into what the yield loss could be or is. So I don't have an answer for you on that. I'm hoping maybe our panelists have an answer for you on that, but putting the pressure on them for that. And really, okay, we are experiencing losses. We know that, right? Our growers are seeing that. We're struggling with it. So what can we actually do about it? And for any other disease, I would come up here and give you a long list of integrated pest management practices. I'd have them all bulleted in an order of importance. I can't pull that together for you. I'm sorry. And I'm very frustrated because it's now been 6, 7 years of saying the same thing. We honestly just don't know. Nobody knows. And if you are an SNL fan, you will get this skit. And I hate to use humor because this has been so frustrating, but we don't honestly know. We don't have research here in Canada say, yes, if you do this, it is going to reduce your verticillium impact by whatever percentage. We just don't have that. However, I will get on my IPM horse here and talk about crop rotation because this is key. I will die on this bridge of crop rotation and the importance of it, and especially in overall disease management. Do I think moving to a 1 in 6 is going to reduce your verticillium? Probably not. And this really comes down to the proximity and the spread of this disease. And if you look at this, I love these maps, but the color schematics, like all the weird greens, but the canola is the pukey green color, if that helps you at all. We grow canola in such a close proximity across Manitoba and across the prairies that this being a wind-borne disease or disease that can move in the soil, we're moving it at harvest time, it's literally everywhere. And that's why we see it from the Red River Valley to the Swan River Valley. So it is there, and even if you are practicing a good rotation, it's still showing up. But overall plant health comes down to a good crop rotation, right? So what we are doing is we're breaking that green bridge for other plant pathogens, other diseases. We're increasing, if we're putting other crops in rotation, right? We're providing a healthier soil. So if we can do those little things, we know there's research to prove that crop rotation for diseases like blackleg and clubroot, it's going to result in a healthier plant that hopefully can fight off some of that verticillium. Well, the volunteers, we've had weed management already this week, right? Ish. Well, it's another key piece, but I'll move over to harvest timing. This one, to me, we don't have no research to back this up. There's been some new work come out of the University of Manitoba here looking at soil-borne inoculum, or the inoculum loads coming from verticillium. So there's no really difference that they've been on early reports between swath timing or straight cut. But there's still this conversation of getting that crop off when it's ready to go. Because the longer it stands out there, the more susceptible it's going to be to verticillium. And I think this year in Manitoba was a really good case of that. If you had your crops off prior to that rain, September, when was it, 12th? Sometime mid-then. Those crops, for the most part, were standing and looked okay. We had a week and a half of rain, and then the symptoms started to ramp up. They were more obvious, right? The pathogen had another 2-3 weeks to keep growing in there, and that's where we started to see some crops starting to go down. So, this is something that's very preliminary, and there is some great work moving forward on trying to quantify inoculum. That'll be an important piece in understanding spread, and then hopefully understanding disease severity and what that might result in yield loss. So it's a conversation point, and I just do really push growers, and I know it's tough on a short window to get those crops off when they're ready to go. The largest movement we've had on any sort of management has been in hybrid resistance or hybrid tolerance. And so 5-6 years ago, right? This wasn't on our radar. We weren't screening for it, looking at it. All the breeding companies have done a really good job of incorporating this and incorporating it quickly into their programs to then try to screen out germplasm in the back end. And so this is a graphic from DL Seeds, and what this is showing is the same hybrid, 2 different locations at different dates across the month of August. So this was on a super aggressive year. You can see this hybrid has gone down and it has gone flat come the end of August. I do want to note, and if you can look on the sides of it, I know they're kind of cut off, but you've got a hybrid on both sides of it standing perfectly fine. So companies are able to see that within their programs. We are starting to move away from these types of products coming forward in the marketplace. And this is just the background tolerance that we're seeing. There's still no standardized system or scale, but this is promising that within our germplasm, not just by fluke, but there's been some tolerance there. That's why we're seeing differences in hybrids and what they're doing at the field level. That in itself comes with a whole host of difficulties and issues. Really right now, because we don't have a standardized scale, there's not a system for registration of anything verticillium tolerant or resistant. Companies can't compare the same things between systems, so there's a lot of variability there. So having a standardized scale is something that the industry should really want. But we're a little ways away from that. We still don't know the losses. When we're looking at field testing, there's variability in the field. So you'll look at one end where you've got really high verticillium pressure, the other end not. So these all start to compound and become very difficult to tease out what we're actually working with. The graphic I'm showing is another one from DL Seeds that I've modified a little bit. And what it's doing is just showing one relationship that we are seeing within a lot of organizations is the increase in maturity. So the longer those plants or the more mature those plants are, they seem to be a little more tolerant to the disease. And what really is probably going on here is the symptoms aren't as obvious in those, but that's just the nature of rating all of your plots at the same time. So it is something that we are teasing out, and when you start to look at company labels, you will notice that some of the fuller, more mature products within a company's portfolio typically have their higher rating for tolerance towards the disease. Okay, we've got some hope. We're seeing things stand. When it comes back then to looking at yield losses, and this is where I'm super confused. This product that's going flat, you can see it here. It is the earliest maturing product in this strip trial at Yorkton this year. That product probably should have come off the end of August. It was left a whole month later. This image would have been taken mid-September. You can see it's gone flat, but it is yielding the exact same as everything else in that field. The highest was right next to it at 57.5. This is replicated strip data. I'm just putting the averages on the strips for reference. The smaller print as you go and move along, those are the fuller season products. So it was more of a maturity type difference here that we were seeing. Those fuller products started to slip in maturity. Dry location, verticillium, blackleg galore. So we're seeing this, and this would be a product, that particular one that we don't position in Manitoba. It's snuck into a Yorkton trial, and this is for that exact reason. The next field you go to, it's standing perfectly fine with verticillium. So still can't help you there. So I think this is my last slide just on breeding canola hybrids. This takes a considerable amount of time, right? And all of the life science companies are starting from ground zero. Right? No one was really working with this. There's no standardized system, so we've all been trying to figure it out for ourselves, which makes it difficult. We've got registration requirements, and at the end of the day, growers are wanting a high-yielding pod shatter variety, probably with a Liberty trait on it. So, right, those disease traits have kind of fallen to the wayside and are not a priority for the grower, but are still a huge priority for the breeder. So they're incorporating a fusarium gene. They're looking at sclerotinia. We've got blackleg and clubroot traits, and now we're trying to put in something to do with verticillium. So this takes time. I will skip over the clubroot breeding line, but we all know how that story goes. When you only rely on one management tactic, resistant hybrids being one, they are overcome very quick. So to wrap this up, it is here. It is widespread, and it's not going anywhere, unfortunately. Really focusing on identifying it, right? I think we're at that point where a lot of us are confident now at identifying at the field level. If you're not, there's a lot of great resources available. Really what that's doing is you're covering your basics, and if it's a different disease, there are options. You have options for blackleg, you have options for clubroot. Harvest timing, just not putting the pressure, the stress on those crops. And I know this is challenging, and growers get mad at me all the time on this, but right, you have to get them off when they're ready to go. And that window is so short, and you have a crummy September that rains half the time. You're really putting stress on those hybrids. They're in there a month longer than they need to be, a lot of them. Hybrid resistance alone is futile and is overcome extremely quick. So looking at an overall integrated pest management approach, incorporating other things, which we still don't know what those are yet, but they need to be brought together to help alleviate the pressure and the stress on the genetics moving forward. And really, industry collaboration is so key. Right, and we're going to hear from some really great experts here next, and how key that collaboration and sharing information and what we've been seeing at the field level as agronomists is super impactful of how we then need to steward and look for new hybrids, look for new management practices. So with that, I will wrap. If you have questions of the content, and I did not do a good job of plugging our poster, that'll be in the poster session. There's some really great new information in there and some new research in there, so I do point you in that direction. Manitoba Agriculture has put it together. But yes, with that, I will stop, and any of my questions, we're going to ask the panel instead. So yeah, we'll go there.